Missiology is a major field within theology that cannot be understood without uh, a good bit of knowledge about sociology. And that is because we need to understand some major concepts. And one of them is the concept of paradigm shifts. So let's dive into this complex material. A paradigm shift, and I'm kind of reading here off your screen, is a transformative change in perceiving and interpreting the world, which leads to insights, innovations, and directions within a particular field of study or practice. So unpacking this, that means that we have sudden changes in perspectives. Now, whenever you have a sudden change in perspective, you challenge something that was adopted by people and accepted as norm. It means that we have new frameworks for understanding stuff. This impacts the way that we practice things, which is very positive, right? It can lead to new discoveries, major advances in technology or methodology, but it can also challenge people. So I'm old enough to predate the era of mobile phones or smartphones, or we thought it was amazing if you had a long cord on your phone so that you could actually take the phone off the hook. I'm also old enough, I actually started out my studies in the sciences. I'm actually a biological engineer. Believe it or not, but way back when, we didn't talk about black holes and things like that. We didn't talk about a Big Bang theory. Prior to a Big Bang theory, there was actually the steady state theory, and that was established within science. So when things get challenged, right? Now people fuss over whether or not there were black holes and there was a Big Bang, and everybody gets their underwear up and what. But I actually am old enough to remember when the Big Bang was first even proposed, because we were told in science class that everything came about by a steady state theory. So what is now presented as this was never not a thing, it actually at one point was not a thing. There was a paradigm shift. So those are what are called scientific revolutions. And so this scientist, Thomas Kuhn, came up with a theory of scientific revolutions, where he says, when you have science and you make steady discoveries, at some point there is a huge shift in it. Like people discover quantum mechanics or DNA sequences, and that revolutionizes scientific understanding. But it doesn't mean that everybody comes along at once. There are always people that just fight that change, but they're big chunks of change. Big ones, mentioned would be the Copernican revolution. Is the Earth the center of the universe, or is the Sun the center of the universe? Apparently, you get burned at the stake for things like that. But these big changes also happen, for example, in cognitive psychology. And so paradigms may continue to evolve or be replaced, but they happen in big terms. So that's the idea. So how does this relate to missiology, right? Well, I propose that in order to understand how missiology has developed, we need to take this leap from science to church history to missiology, and we do that by way of looking at three major contributors, three major people. So we use Thomas Kuhn, and there's an ethos puzzle for that. His theory of scientific revolution, paradigms, as foundational. So his theory of major scientific discoveries in paradigms. And then I want to look at Hans Kuhn, who used this idea of, paradigms, and said, look, we can divide church history into major terms. Now, typically that would concern Western church history. And then along came David Bosch, a major missiologist in the 20th century, who used these principles developed first by Kuhn and then used in church history, and said, let's take a sub part of church history, missiology, the history of missiology, and see if we can use these principles to see what happened in our understanding of mission and missions. So let's take these building blocks and break them down. So first of all, Thomas Kuhn, so the one that did the scientific discoveries, right? His paradigm shift. So, like I said, he said, science does not just change because we keep accumulating knowledge, 80 bits at the once, but by sudden revolutions, sudden big changes. And so that's pretty much what he did. And he says there's always like a moment of crisis, of conflict, to get people on board for these new ways of thinking. And then church history will come to it. But David Boss, this missiologist, used those concepts and applied them to mission, like I said. Now, he was from South Africa. A lot of great theologians come from South Africa. And he wrote a book that totally shaped the study of missiology. And I remember being in seminary back, mid-90s, 95 to 2002 or something, and reading what we would call the Purple Monster. It was thick like this one, and the whole monster was about these paradigm shifts in missiology. And only recently, at the anniversary of that book, did they come out, and this was my summer reading, with an anniversary edition. Boss has passed, and that they talked about, has there been a new paradigm shift? And yes, there has. So read the updated one. It's available for you to buy as well. And everybody was raving about this. Christianity Today said it's one of the most important books that has been written in terms of religion. Leslie Newbigin, every field has his major champions, but he's one of the greatest missiologists that ever lived. He's from Great Britain, passed away in '98. He says this is the Summa Missiologica, just the greatest one ever. So he took that and he said, just like we can divide up church history into parts, we can then divide the history of missiology into 6 historical paradigms, as if you have scientific revolutions. And so I invite you to get a good feel about that. So it's not a focus on what gradually happens, what were big shifts that really made people adapt and readjust to how faith works and how our understanding of God's mission works, and how the church and how faith had to realign. And so it's greatly affected people's understanding. And then in the end, of course, the question has to be, how did that affect doing missions in the 21st century? And I think that's where the new book comes in. So based on Hans Kuhn, who did the church history paradigms, David Boss came up with these 6. And so he kind of takes the 6 divisions that Hans Kuhn comes up with for church history and then looks at it in terms of missions. So at least it was these 6: an apocalyptic paradigm of early Christianity, a Hellenistic paradigm of the patristic period, so patristics is your church fathers, a medieval Roman Catholic paradigm, a Protestant or Reformation paradigm, a modern Enlightenment paradigm, and an emerging ecumenical paradigm. And if some of these terms are difficult, why don't you check some Google or AI for that, right? Okay, so running through that, there's a little bit of a description. The early church is really connected to the story of Jesus, really sees it, just like Paul did. They really think that Christianity is going to wrap up soon. Jesus is going to come back, and we're just in this battle of good and evil. That affects how you do mission, right? Then next, you get kind of this Greek feel of how the church fathers, the next leaders, deal with that. So in the next couple of centuries, They relate to culture and philosophies of the time. They form theology, how they think about the faith, and they kick against the emperor, and they really want to live incarnationally. They really want to live out the faith of Jesus. Then you get a next millennium of after Constantine, of just developing what it means to be the church, and they emphasize the cross. Roman theology says, just come to us. We're Christianity, and instead of going out, you come to us. Compel them to come in. And it pretty much became, we are in charge of this, and you come to us. Then you get the Reformation, where the reformers figure out that this is about righteousness that has been brought about by Jesus. They start emphasizing personal sinfulness and a need for salvation, emphasizing the role of Scripture. But it still doesn't mean that we're going to go out and convert the whole world. So the radical Reformation follows. That means the formation of the Mennonites and the Baptists and the Anabaptists. And so the Anabaptists, from whence the Baptists come, think that Christianity is not in a good shape, and separate from that and go and tell everybody else. And so the mission field arrives. And they take the Great Commission very seriously. And from there you get missions. You get like the William Carys of the world. Well, fast forwarding, we get to the modern Enlightenment. So the modern Enlightenment happens. This aligns with Kuhn's scientific revolutions, right? So we get all these innovations, and age of rationalism comes about, right? And so people start figuring things out for themselves. They want autonomy. Now, the Great Commission is upheld, but man, they are able to invent so many things, and it is just fantastic what you can do as an individual. Meanwhile, in the churches, because it seems like the golden age, people get what they call a post-millennial form of optimism. They believe that they can bring in the 1,000-year reign. They go out in the world and they colonize, and they think it's all that. What happens in the end? So Bosch's paradigm starts with number 6. He says in the very end, it's kind of humbling, because the West, that was so big in its mission influence, kind of loses its dominance in the world. The colonial era comes to an end, and so oppression is being overthrown, exploitation is being challenged, rightly so. And he says what you see is churches coming together. Ecumenical paradigm is what he says he sees in the end. He sees a coming together with these big conferences. You see displaced peoples at that point already, technologies in uprise, which means it facilitates the coming together of people. At that point, he recognizes the globalization patterns and new global concerns. That was in the 90s. He recognizes the need for environmental concerns. And that was where the Purple Book left out. And this was the point where missions was responding to a world in need. This displaced peoples meant new approaches to missions. Environmental concerns meant a new approach to missions. But the West was still kind of holding on to its role in that. And it's kind of wondering what 21st century missions would look like, but wasn't quite sure. So that's what you get when you read these paradigms, big shifts all around. And the question was, what was next? And I think what was next was answered here, and we live in the what is next. And the proposal is that next is missional theology. What does that look like? So this is the newest paradigm. A little bit of history. Already in World War I, apparently, we see some contours of this. Um, Two French Catholics wrote La France, pays de mission. Is France a mission country? Which of course would be ironic, right? At that point, they were still the great colonizers. Then again, here you have Leslie Newbigin, the great missiologist who has passed, and Michael Cohen, who still is alive. I think he teaches uh, still up north in Michigan. They say a church that is not a mission is not a church. So the church itself has to be a mission. So it's recognized that there is ample secularization going on, which will be a topic in this course. We no longer recognize a single religion or ideology that, in a country or in a society sets a pattern that makes a reference for a society, especially in the West, right? So what's happening to the churches? Do countries that formerly sent out missionaries now become mission fields? In 2002, Philip Jenkins wrote a very important work. He wrote the book The Next Christendom. Philip Jenkins is a history teacher at Baylor, history professor, and he recognized that the center of gravity of missions is now shifted toward Africa, and I would say also towards Asia and South America, and something that we will also see in the rest of the course. And so we call that the global South. So much has changed, so that we're still sitting here in the West thinking we're all that, but we're not. Global Christianity has changed. So yes, we have become a mission country. America, the West, we are a mission field. Our churches are mission fields. People are sitting in our pews, people are in our Christian schools, and they either don't know the full story of Christianity, they don't know the Bible. You may be studying missiology, but you don't really know the Bible very well. And people don't know Jesus. And we are still active parts of the mission, God's mission. So we are to be a missional church, which leads to missional ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is a fancy word for the study of the church. So in other words, we are both the mission and we are missional. Our churches are both a mission field and we go out as missionaries. That's the latest paradigm. It's a missional theology. Isn't that something? So what does it look like today? Well, if you want to give some contemporary language to what these paradigms may have looked like, you may say that in the first part of history, people put an emphasis on spiritual warfare. And then they started to accommodate the culture. And then during the era of the Roman Catholic Church, they pretty much said, we're a Christian nation, join us. And then the Protestants came along and said, we're all sinners saved by grace. But not much happened. Then in the modern Enlightenment paradigm, it's kind of like, doing apologetics, signs in the Bible, and end-time preaching. All of that is passé. And then became the emphasis started to be put on social justice and social engagement. That's where Boss said the paradigm was at the sixth paradigm, but there is a shift to the seventh paradigm, missional theology, being on mission while being the mission field. Oh, that means we have to swallow our pride. That means you're studying missiology, maybe because you want to be missional and go to the mission field and realizing we are the mission field. And remember, shifting paradigms is always hard. We want to continue to say, no, 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 no. We have to do apologetics. We have to study more apologetics. We have to do more end-time preaching. We have to focus on social justice. It takes a while to get everyone on board, to understand that there is a new paradigm. We are on mission while being the mission field. Wow, isn't that something? It takes a little bit of getting used to, isn't it? Let's see, I can never know how to turn this off.